This video is going to be a little bit different than my regular adventure style videos. I'm going to answer a question that always seems to flood my inbox, so I don't have to keep answering it. I can just send people to this video instead. And that question is, which camera should I buy? The Nikon D500 or the Nikon D850? It's not an easy choice, and you can't go wrong with either camera. They're both fantastic. If you don't have a budget concern, I would highly suggest getting both, and here's why. I was shooting some hummingbirds in Colorado this summer, and I had my D850 with the 500 f4 mounted on my tripod, and some of the hummingbirds were coming up too close and I couldn't get to them quick enough, but I had my D500 with the 200 to 500 in hand, and I could capture those shots with this one. So with both cameras, you really can't miss anything. But I understand that a lot of people can't afford both cameras, so they have to make a choice. And hopefully this video will help you make that choice. If you want the absolute best image quality, then there's no question, choose the D850. But that better image quality comes at a much higher price, and it's gonna demand the absolute most out of you as a photographer. The slightest mistake in your technique will be massively amplified by this big, glorious, high-resolution sensor. You also need to have a really good understanding of exposure, because the D850 will show you every mistake that you make. And that's kind of a good thing, because you can use that as a teaching tool to help you become a better photographer. If you have prime lenses, the D850 is the obvious better choice, because strapping a prime lens on the D850, oh man, the pictures are just absolutely beautiful in every sense of the word. There's just no comparing them. If you're new to photography, I wouldn't suggest the D850. It might be just too much camera for you. If you want the best wildlife camera money can buy in the Nikon line, then definitely choose the D500. You cannot beat the performance of this camera for the price. It's absolutely amazing. It really, really is. If you're new to photography, I also highly suggest trying the D500 first. It's a little bit easier to use, and spend some time learning the camera and go out, practice as much as possible. And then when you think you're ready, upgrade maybe to the D850. If you want the best wildlife body lens combo, in my opinion, that money can buy, you can't go wrong with the D500 and the Nikkor 200 to 500. And here's something interesting to note. If you take the 200 to 500 and you put it on the D850, I think the D850 underperforms. I don't think this lens works as good on the D850, because the D850 has a much wider sensor, and the edges of the images with this lens on the D850 will be soft. They won't be on the D500, and you really can't, like I said, for the price, you can't beat this combination. While I'm on the subject of price, right out of the box, the D500 works flawlessly at a much, much lower price than the D850. You can buy the D500, a lens, put the two together, and go off, and it's just fantastic. If you want to get the D850 close to the performance of the D500, you're gonna have to invest some extra money. You're gonna have to buy a battery grip, a large capacity battery, a battery door, and a charger. All of that stuff, brand new, costs almost $1,000. So as far as price is concerned, I think the D500 is the clear winner. The price of the camera really doesn't mean anything if you can't find it. You can find the D500 pretty much anywhere. The D850 is still pretty much missing in action at almost every major retailer. Not sure why that is, considering it's such an excellent camera, but for some reason, it's much, much harder to find. At least it was at the time of this video. One of the key selling points for both of these cameras and a wildlife perspective is the actual shooting speed and autofocus acquisition. The D500 right out of the box, you get 10 frames per second. It's just blistering fast. The autofocus speed and acquisition is just incredible. It locks on focus so fast. The D850 right out of the box is a little bit slower. You're gonna get 7 frames per second. And the autofocus is also a little bit slower. If you want to get the autofocus up to par or really close to what the D500 can do, you're gonna have to buy that grip, the battery, the charger, and the door. If I had to rate either one of these cameras or both of these cameras on a scale of say 1 to 100 for autofocus performance, I'd give the D500 a 98. The D850 without the grip, I'd give it around a 70. If you get the grip, it improves the autofocus quite dramatically, and I'd say maybe brings it up to about a 95 to 96%. It's actually quite incredible with the grip, huge difference. Another thing to consider when you're thinking about the speed is the actual image quality. While you get 1 frame per second more when you're using the D500 and the autofocus is maybe 3% better, the image quality on the D850 with the grip, it's very important, you gotta have the grip, it really is just sometimes mind-blowing how good it is. So for me, I like the image quality on the D850 more than the image quality on the D500. But if I'm in a situation that's like a once-in-a-lifetime situation and I need something that's gonna respond super, super fast and give me the most opportunity, I think the D500 would be the better choice. Another important thing to consider in regards to wildlife photography is the camera buffer. How many shots you can get before the camera actually starts to slow down. Now, there's a lot of things that actually affect the buffer size. Some settings will make it have a smaller buffer or a larger buffer, so I'm not gonna go into that. But the D500 has an almost, at times, seems limitless buffer. You can fire off shots, it'll start to slow down, you can let your finger off the shutter button, start firing shots again, and it's ready to go. The D850, the buffer fills pretty quickly because you're shooting really high resolution images. So that should be considered as well. The D850 buffer also doesn't seem to empty or clear as fast. So if you're firing a burst on the D850, you might get, I don't know, 25 shots before it starts to slow down, and then you might be waiting a painful amount of time. I haven't actually timed it, but when you're out in the field, it seems like it's too long. So that's something else to consider. You can shoot the D850 in crop mode, which will be closer to shooting it like the D500, but then what's the point of having all of that sensor, you know, the glorious sensor if you shoot in crop mode? So that's something else to consider as well. You know, something else to consider from a wildlife perspective is the sound of the cameras. The D500 is really quiet compared to the D850. Here, I'll show you. Here's the D500 shooting. I got kind of an empty room, so it echoes out a little bit. And let me get the D850 and you can hear the difference. It's quite louder. All right, so here's how loud the D850 is. Oh man, yeah, it's a lot louder. So that's something else to consider as well. You know, another thing to consider are the file sizes. The D500 file sizes are less than half of the file size of the D850. So what does that mean? You can have more space on your memory cards with the D500. The D850 is gonna require more memory space, more hard drive space, more processing power out of your computer because the images are huge. Another thing to consider is video. Do you shoot video on these? I do, I shoot a lot, so that's a big consideration for me. The D500 does 1080p, it does 4K, but when it does 4K, it's a massive crop, which a lot of people don't like, but it's actually kind of powerful for wildlife. So if you're using, say, the 200 to 500, and then you have like a 1.4 teleconverter, and you're shooting in 4K on the D500, you're up at around 1500 millimeters. That's really, really close. It's actually really powerful. You gotta have a really good steady tripod for that though. The D850, it does all kinds of good stuff in video. It does 4K, doesn't crop, does 1080p, it does slow motion, all in camera, which I love. That's actually one of my favorite features of the D850 is shooting in slow motion video. It's just so good. You can handhold one of these big lenses and shoot video, and because it's slow motion, your movements aren't exaggerated and it doesn't shake. Another thing to consider on both of these cameras, the D500 and the D850, autofocus for video on the Nikon DSLRs just doesn't work well. You have to work around it. And basically shoot in manual mode. Their new mirrorless cameras, the Z7 and the Z6, that's a different story. The video on those cameras, in fact, that's what I'm filming all of this with, is a Z7. The video does incredible autofocus, way, way better than either of these. So that's something to consider when you're looking at these two cameras if you want to shoot video. Just remember the autofocus for video doesn't really work that well. if I had to pick a fault with either one of these cameras, it's really tough because they both perform so well. The D500 does tend to blow out the highlights very easily. So white birds with dark backgrounds will tend to be overexposed. So I tend to underexpose the image just a little bit to prevent that. Some people have complained that the D500 images aren't quite as clean. They're just a little bit of a grain to them. I don't really see a problem with it. I've printed some actual cropped shots from a D500 on huge prints and they look fantastic. If I had to fault the D850, I could really only think of one thing, and that's the buffer being a little bit too small. But it's kind of easy to work around it. The D850 really is like the Swiss Army knife of cameras. It does everything, and it does everything just unbelievably good. Landscape, macro, portrait, wildlife, street photography, astrophotography, pretty much everything can be done very, very well with the D850. I'm not saying that you can't do those things with the D500 because you can. I just think the overall image quality on the D850 is a lot better than the D500. So I hope I've covered everything, and I hope it didn't actually confuse you and make your decision on which camera you should buy even more difficult. I've been shooting with both of these cameras for quite a while, and I know them pretty well. I know which one to grab and when, and I tend to go for my D850 more than the D500 just again because I like the overall image quality. If there's anything that you think I didn't cover or that I missed, feel free to ask in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer. There's a link in the description below that goes out to B&H and it highlights all of the gear I use. It's really cool of them to set that page up for me. I also write books, shirts like this. I have all this kind of stuff on my website. There'll be a link to that stuff in the description below. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead. I've got a lot of videos planned, different than this. I usually just go out and take pictures, so this one is a little bit different. Click that thumbs up, and until next time, I'll see you later. If you want to know how I set up my D500 and my D850 for birds in flight, check out my website for easy to follow setup guides. And if you want to come with me and capture your own images of birds in Florida, I offer workshops in fall and winter. Check out my website for details, and thanks for watching.